Who are you talking with?
Bill.
Did he know the ordinance?
Oh, well, I couldn't remember his name, but I didn't know him.
Curry was last name.
Curry, that's right.
That was a pretty well-known name around.
Well, Stefan Curry.
We spelled his with a Y. Spelled his with I-E.
That's it. Yeah. Let me see. I wonder if it's done. Then we'll move it.
Hey, Winnie. Hey, sweetheart.
I have these swim lessons.
Yeah, we got swim lessons here.
For you.
And it tells us what time it is.
All kinds of displays.
I have to get there.
And say hello.
For sure.
Were they here for the children's show?
But yeah, it's you going swimming?
No, we do it at the moment. We do it at a group called Swim Fanatics, and they are at
They came today.
Marriott, Airport Marriott.
They didn't come?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was glad to see that. So there's a place opening up right next to
I
her.
think the stewards are here.
All right. Yeah, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah. So we're kind of waiting to see.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks everybody for coming. The Congregational Care Committee, we spent some time thinking about what would be of help and of interest to folks in the congregation. And so one of the items that came up was advanced healthcare planning. And so I'm happy to have Lisa along with us today. And I think that Linda Fitz used to work with her quite a bit. So and Lynn Carey, or you can't hear me? Oh,
Yeah, gotta be nice and loud.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to let Risa take us away then and talk about advanced planning. Thank you.
So let me know if you can hear me. I am small, but I have a loud mouth. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I have been here a couple of years ago, and Linda knows me because we used to have the opportunity to work together. And one of my claims to fame is that I am directionally impaired, so I love coming someplace where I know where I am going. I am also very short, so you may not all see me at the same time, so I will stray a little bit. I am Risa Hanau, and I work with AuthoriCare Collective. And some of you may know AuthoriCare Collective as what used to be known as Hospice and Palliative Care of Greensboro. And 5 years ago, October 1st, we merged with Hospice of Alamance Caswell to become AuthoriCare Collective. And we did that because we are two legacy nonprofit hospices that have been in the community, and we have a desire to continue to have nonprofit hospice in our community. So we took two thriving, very similar organizations in truth, and became AuthoriCare Collective. Now, doing that 3 months before a pandemic was not optimal, but it taught us how to use technology really quickly. So one of the things that I get to do, I've worked with AuthoriCare Collective. February will be my 21st anniversary there, is that I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have had many different name badges over the years doing different things, but the constant that I have done is education for our staff and for the community. And one of the things that I am passionate about doing education around is what is known as advanced care planning. Now, people often think about advanced care documents, and documents are important, but I want to plant the seed that we're talking about advanced care planning in the same way that we might plan out other things in our lives in terms of where it is we might want to work, where it is we might want to retire, what are our goals, what is on our bucket list, what is important to us. Advanced care planning is the notion of taking time to think about something that many of us do not want to think about, and can be very difficult because many of us have something going on in our lives, and congregations have losses and celebrations, and that is a part of that cycle of life. But what we know is that when we do not talk about the reality of that life cycle and the what if, we often find ourselves, or a family member finds themselves in a crisis situation where somebody says, "How could you have thought that's what I wanted?" And when we have the opportunity to stop and exercise some muscles that we might not exercise too often in a safe space, it can be very, very helpful. So in the same way that I, and possibly you, are told, you need to build your core, right? It is your core that strengthens your body, and it helps your posture, and it lets you have the best life and thrive and be active. If you engage in what is known as advanced care planning, or sitting and talking about what gives your life meaning. Linda was telling me she and a group were just last weekend on a trip. Travel might be something that's really important to you. So thinking about, where does our family fit in our life? Where does faith fit in our life? Where does being active, and how do we define that? What is a good life according to me, according to you? Because we are all different. And we know that society is not great at talking about this. If we were to gather with family for a meal and we say, you know, I'd love to talk about my health care power of attorney, somebody is going to say, did you just get a bad test back, right? Because we don't do it often enough. Now, if you said, let me tell you what your blood pressure is, because that's become a normal thing. This should be normal. We have health insurance, we have car insurance, we hope many people have flood insurance. Talking about advanced care planning is like developing insurance. So advanced care planning is not a one and done. In the same way that we review our auto policy, we decide during Medicare open enrollment if we're at that place, if we want to keep the same plan. Advanced care planning is an ongoing, I would argue, from the time you're a legal adult. We're missing a few of that generation, but that is truly what we would love to see normalized. Now, I have been, I finished graduate school in 1989. I have been doing these talks since then, and the statistic when I got out of graduate school was that 1/3 of the people in the country have a completed living will or healthcare power of attorney. In 2024, sadly, the statistic is the same. In spite of, I would argue, at least 500 talks that I've done, but even if we don't have a document, if we have a little bit more of awareness. So, let's see in this room, if I say, who has a living will? You are above average, not surprisingly. Who has a healthcare power of attorney? Above average. Have you looked at it in the last 12 months? Getting closer to average. Because these are not documents that you want to stash away, which we tend to do, because sometimes they're done during estate planning, and we get a will and we get this whole ream of paper and we stick it maybe in a lockbox or in a, security box, and we don't look at it. So if you have a document and you haven't looked at it in 12 months, or you've looked at it but you have had a change in your personal health condition, or the person named as a healthcare power of attorney has had a change, then you want to go home, find it, look at it, see if it still reflects your wishes. And nowadays, those of us who participate in either Cone Health or any other local healthcare system, there are mechanisms within MyChart and online portals where you can literally upload your current document, which is very important. And your individual physician office can tell you how to do that. If you get on MyChart, if you use it, it will tell you how to do that. And there's a little flyer that is put out by MyChart, at least with Cone Health, that tells you how to do it. But before we get ahead of ourselves about the documents, let's think about those conversations. And as I said, you nearly laughed falling off your chair at the suggestion of a conversation. And why is that?
It's just not anything you bring up and talk about in a normal conversation.
Because it's not polite, it might upset somebody.
Or they'll think you've had bad news.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So what I would challenge all of us is to think about an entry point. And there are different entry points for all of us. Some of us, it is, what would you like for your birthday? I'd like a conversation. You could try it. If you're having a family gathering around a holiday, we know as we have holidays come up, we have New Year's come up, to say, it is really important to me. Sometimes it's done initially by writing a letter or an email. When my father was alive, this was many years ago, he would write the same letter to my sister and I, and he would write, Dear Cheryl / Risa, and he would circle the appropriate name. I hope you're having a good time at Muhlenberg / Temple. And then he'd mail it to us. So we'd get the same letter. So we can write a letter and say, this is really important to me. The ultimate reality is that my having a conversation about, I want what happened with Aunt Betty to be the way things go for me, or I want the way things went for Uncle Bob not to be the way. Sometimes that's how we can do it. We can use an example. But what we cannot do is expect even our spouses, our children, our most close intimates to know what our heart is. That is taking a chance that something will be done that I would not want. And so the idea behind advanced care planning is saying, in the best of all worlds, I would love to be able to stay in my home, and if that is not possible, these are some things I would like to think about. If I were ever diagnosed with a dementia, these are some things that are important. I would or I would not ever want a feeding tube. There are certain things that we inherently know, but we don't talk about them. So if we can begin maybe writing, begin having some conversation, talk with our, intimates, talk with friends, talk with physician. This is important not just when you get a diagnosis, because the reality is advanced care planning, advanced care documents, which in North Carolina are defined as a living will or a request for a natural death or a health care power of attorney, came about because of a woman in her 30s by the name of Nancy Cruzan. And Nancy Cruzan is someone who in the Midwest was a single woman, lived at home, had an awful car accident one night, flipped her car, and she was resuscitated but never regained consciousness. And in those days, the term persistent vegetative state was used, not a very gracious term. Now we use permanently unconscious. Not sure if that's better. But what happened with Nancy Cruzan was that after a period of being in the hospital where she was very aggressively treated, and over the course of months and months and months, she could breathe on her own, and that was it. She had no awareness of self, could do nothing, and was transferred to a nursing home and was fed through a tube. And her parents and her siblings all together agreed Nancy would not want to live like this. She was vivacious and independent, and she's lying here. And they requested that that feeding tube be turned off. And the nursing home said no. And they said, we will take her home then. And they said, we will call the police. And so they filed a lawsuit. And that lawsuit actually became a gentleman by the name of William Colby. He was a very young attorney. His office had a request and requirement for people to do pro bono work. He got that case as a pro bono case, and it became his life's work. That went to the Supreme Court. And it became what's known as the Patient Rights Act. Now, the Patient Self-Determination Act is a federal law. And what the federal law says is every one of us has the right to accept or refuse any treatment at any time, even if we are not able to express our wishes in the moment. How does that happen? It happens by, number one, making a living will, and number two, making an advance directive that names someone who speaks on my behalf. But what the federal statute says is every state makes your own individual law. So it gets a little confusing what state, if you snowbird in 2 different states, but basically what those documents say is for a living will. A living will in North Carolina, number one, only kicks in if you do not have the capacity or the ability to make your own decisions in the moment. As long as you can make your own decisions, you get to make them. That's why these are like insurance policies. So a living will becomes active when I can't understand information and don't have capacity to make a decision, and I have been determined to be in a permanently unconscious state. I have a terminal illness, or I have far progressed dementia. It's only those 3 instances, and in fact, you check. You can say only this one, only. Most people pick all 3. And then it goes on to say, I do not want my life prolonged, but I would want artificial hydration and nutrition, yes or no. And the reason why that is there is because eating and drinking is such a basic and visceral part of our lives. Now, the truth is, when somebody is in one of those states, artificial feeding, which is determined as food going in any way except the mouth, whether it's a tube in the nose, a vein, a stomach, it has not been shown to prolong life or quality of life in actuality, because the body can't use the food in the same way we can really enjoy those cheese biscuits back there, right? It enhances our life. So the living will is a document that you fill out yourself, giving a bit of a roadmap, saying if I ever have one of these 3 conditions, this is what I would or would not want. And then you sign it in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. And it's done. But you don't want to stop there. You want to share it with people. Because if they don't know you have it, it does us no good. The other document, and what I brought with me, is known as the simple form, because it puts a living will and a healthcare power of attorney together, so you don't have to sign and witness and notarize 2 forms. The healthcare power of attorney document, one can argue, has a bit more power behind it. Because what it says is, if I, Risa, cannot make a decision, I want Linda to make the decision on my behalf. And if Linda's not available, I want Catherine to make the decision on my behalf. Now, the best hope is that I have actually sat down with Linda and Catherine and had a conversation. We've emailed. I don't think Catherine knows my heart. What you want is the person who can say, I know what Risa would want, and this is what we should do. We don't want Linda to say, what I would want is, so that's what you should do to Risa. And that's where we have a gap. Because if we don't have the conversation, Linda's gonna do what Linda would want for Linda and not for Risa. The greatest gift that Linda could do is to say, Risa, after listening to some of your wants and your requests, maybe I say I would never want blood products. Maybe I say I would want a feeding tube. Maybe, and Linda would say, I'm not comfortable. I don't know that I could carry that out. I should thank her. You don't want your healthcare power of attorney to be somebody who doesn't know you. And you don't want your healthcare power of attorney to be your oldest child because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do, or your spouse, or the societal norms. I will tell you, my older sister, the pathologist, was my parents' healthcare power of attorney versus the hospice social worker. One could argue not the best decision in one situation, but they did it because, well, Cheryl has to because she's the oldest and she's a doctor. She wasn't a great decision maker and didn't understand some of the nuances of end of life because she's a pathologist, right? So the reason we also need to look back at our document is somebody we named 10 years ago may no longer be in the position to carry out being the healthcare power of attorney. Realistically, they could have passed, or they could have a dementia, or they were your spouse and they no longer are your spouse, but they're still your decision maker. So we want to be thoughtful about these things. We want to look at them. We want to pull them back out. We want to give thought. But it's about the conversation. It's about a conversation with your healthcare provider so you understand your healthcare situation. What are some potential decisions I might need to make given this diagnosis, given the fact that I am aging, given the fact, fill in the blank. And you make it, and then you get a new situation. Maybe that's when you have to update that healthcare power of attorney. These documents are not the answer to everything. I will not stand here and tell you that if you have a healthcare power of attorney and a living will, that there'll never be a conflict or a question or a problem. Because if I make Linda my healthcare power of attorney and Catherine is my second, and I don't tell my sister, then she's going to assume she's the decision maker because next of kin takes over when we don't have those documents. So it's important to talk to who you are going to name, give them copies of the document, and the people you don't name as healthcare power of attorney. And I want to note that there is a difference between financial and healthcare. Your healthcare power of attorney might not be great with numbers, so you can name different people. They are separate documents. Healthcare power of attorney, living wills, we make ourselves, and only we can make them. Nobody can make them on your behalf. I have had many people call me and say, I'd like to come in and do a document for my mother. You cannot do that. That's why we have to be proactive and do it while we can. We don't know when we will lose capacity. People are sometimes reluctant because they say, if I make a healthcare power of attorney, Linda's gonna start running my life and make all my decisions, but she doesn't get to make decisions unless I let. The healthcare power of attorney doesn't get to make decisions unless I am unable. And in fact, if I am unable with a healthcare power of attorney because I had surgery and I have an emergency and they want to take me back and I can't make a decision, Linda can make that decision in the moment. When I come back to myself, I take back over. So a healthcare power of attorney can go in and out of force. And that's where it's like an insurance policy. Because there is nothing worse than 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody saying, what would they have wanted? And you saying, I don't know. We never talked about it. So before I stop for questions, I will also note that the documents I am talking about are things that we can get ourselves. I brought a couple with me. You can take them. I can email them to you. You can make copies of what I brought. The original and copies are all valid. These we make ourselves. There are 2 other documents that you may have some familiarity with, and one is called, I'm going to move for a second.
Okay.
One is called Do Not Resuscitate Order. And that is this goldenrod piece of paper. And this basically is something that is known as an out-of-facility do not resuscitate order. This is a medical order. We can't get this and sign it and do it for ourselves. This is something we might talk to our doctor about if we or a loved one, someone we're caring for or about, is in a fragile state of health and they do not want a resuscitation attempt if 911 was to be called. This is something that we get from our healthcare provider, or if we have an organization like AuthoriCare Collective or another healthcare organization. The other thing that some of you may have seen, the state calls this Pulsar Pink, because you have to get it on the right paper, is called a MOST form, or a medical order scope of treatment. This is something that those of you who like to research started in Oregon as POLST, P-O-L-S-T, physician order or something, and then every state adopts their own. You can see this is longer than this. The top is basically a do not resuscitate, but then it talks about how aggressive. Would I want to go back to a hospital or not go back to a hospital? Would I want to be in an ICU or not? Would I want antibiotics or not? And it gives you the choice to say, I don't know, I would decide in the moment. So this isn't ironclad, but it's a good discussion piece for somebody who may have a diagnosis, something that is progressive. And again, this is a medical order, and this one forces it to be reviewed every year. And it should be reviewed if there's a change in health status. But that's a medical order. We, again, get it from healthcare providers. So living will, healthcare power of attorney, we do ourselves, sign ourselves, witness, notarize. The other 2 are actually medical orders, but oftentimes they're sort of talked about in a similar vein. The final thing I'll say is that there is no charge to complete a living will or a healthcare power of attorney. Many of us may have it done as a part of our estate planning, and that is fine as long as there is a conversation. As long as the estate planner, the attorney, is not making an assumption that of course you want your spouse to be your healthcare pet, or you want, right? As long as there is a conversation and you have those documents discreetly separated from that other big packet so you can make copies and give it to people and get it uploaded into your medical record. The 2 documents that are the medical orders, EMS needs the original. You can make copies for records, but they will only accept the original of these two. So, yes.
Those two forms we request from our physician?
Yes, and, you know, for the person who is healthy, who is active, who does not have a diagnosis of a progressive or a illness that we are concerned is going to, you know, become troublesome in the next year or so, generally we are not seeing these documents. Somebody who is 100 maybe wants, even if they're in good health, but they are from our physician. The physicians generally have them. If not, they call our office, in all honesty. We have them, but they have to be signed by a healthcare, by either a physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. And they come from the medical society.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
I had a trust set up when I lived in Florida.
Yeah.
So all these documents are Florida. Should I go to an attorney here?
Well, so for the trust, I can't speak to. I would imagine you would want it reviewed for North Carolina law. I can tell you from the perspective of my mother having died in Pennsylvania, just even the estate process is very different in North Carolina than it is in Pennsylvania. So from the trust, whether it would be honored or if anything had to be changed, if your living will, healthcare power of attorney is a part of that, you could go to the attorney for that, or you could make a new document, which is a North Carolina document. The most currently dated document is the valid document, but you need to let people know that. This document and pretty much every state document says it is my expectation that this be respected no matter where I am. So it gives some coverage if you're in a different state, but if this is your permanent residence, you are better off to have a North Carolina document because people are familiar with a North Carolina document.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions or comments or thoughts or, yes?
Years ago, we had a meeting like this with our church nurse, and she said on our refrigerator there should be a Ziploc bag that has current, has our blood type and medicines and pertinent medical information.
Yeah.
Is that where those ought to be?
Right. So what I would say is when, like in the palliative care world and the hospice world, if somebody is actively under services, we ask people to put these on the refrigerator just in case EMS comes in. What you're talking about, you could have your healthcare power of attorney and living will, or you could say healthcare power of attorney and living will is in the top drawer of, or is on file with, or nowadays our phones have different things that we can, but you want, I keep a copy of mine in my glove compartment. There are different things that we can do to let people know, you know, that we have these things, a list of medication and things of that sort. It's all about normalizing this as a part of the conversation of our care. Yes.
Excuse me, did you say some of the forms are on my chart with guidance or?
So the way to upload the document, the instructions are on my chart. And there's also a flyer. So you ultimately, if you can, and I won't say I'm fairly IT literate, but I actually mailed a hard copy of mine to the address, which somehow felt easier than scanning it. But I now can log on and I see a flag that says healthcare power attorney. So I know there's a address that you can send it to, and they will themselves. And if you bring a copy to your provider's office, they will do that as well. But you want to then go back and check that it's really there. And if you update it, you want the new one replaced, right? So, what else? All right. Yes?
I had a will done, I guess, 80 years ago. And then a couple of years later, there was a change in the law. Let's change your will. $350 to do 5 minutes worth of work. Do you have to keep up your will, or can you?
Well, keep up your will. I would say, I am not a lawyer, I'm a social worker. If you have a change in where you would want, monies to go, instead of a child to a charity, a different charity, you would want things handled differently, you would want to be looking at that. There was a change for those of you who did a healthcare power of attorney and living will before 2007. If you made it back then, and I had one of those older ones, advanced dementia was not one of the triggers for a living will. It was only permanent unconscious state or terminal illness. In 2007 is when they added advanced dementia. Now, your document is still valid, but it does not include advanced dementia. So if you have one of those older documents, and if you had a document prepared by an attorney, you might want to look to see whether all three are included in there, because it was added to the statute, because there are so many people who have dementia that would not want their lives prolonged, but they don't meet the criteria of terminal illness, which per Medicare is a life expectancy of 6 months or less if things progress the way we expect. So that is a caveat. Yeah. Great questions. And I have some copies of the documents. I have a just very general brochure. There are some pens, Post-it notes. The contact information for our organization is there. I am somebody who sits with people and goes line by line if you were to have a question. The biggest point of a question is in the document. You have to say, if there's a disagreement in the healthcare power of attorney, you have to say, if there's a disagreement between my healthcare power of attorney and a disagreement between my healthcare power of attorney and my living will, listen to my healthcare power of attorney, because she's standing in the hall getting the real information, or my living will, because I know what I do or do not want. And that is a decision you have to make. And that's probably the most common question, that why people ask to meet with me. I'm happy to meet with people individually, in person, or sometimes we even now do it virtually. So if that were to be something that would be helpful, we could do that. So, all right, thank you.
All right, well, let's thank our speaker. Thank you very much. And if anybody would like her contact information and reach out to her, I've got the information, and Linda does too. You can just ask us afterwards. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.